Okay, so today what we're going to be working on is being able to manipulate equations in all of the different forms. So what's going to happen is I'm going to start by giving you a set of 2 points. You're going to find the slope, you're going to write a point-slope equation, then you're going to turn it into slope-intercept form, and then turn it back into standard form. Right, so we have all of the different ways that we write equations here. So we're going to start by writing a point-slope equation, right? And then we're going to turn our point slopes into slope-intercept form. And then from slope-intercept form, we're going to turn them back into standard form, which is usually the hardest part for kids' brains to remember what to do. Remember, when you're calculating slope, you are going to be using your slope formula because we are going to do slope between 2 points. So remember, when we're doing slope, it's going to be your y minus your y over your x minus your x. Right, so we're going to use our y2 minus y1 over our x2 minus our x1 formula for calculating slope when we have to start out each problem. So each problem is going to start with that y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 to calculate the slope. Then we're going to write a point slope equation. We're going to turn point slope into slope intercept. Then we're going to go back into standard form, which is usually the hardest part for kids. And mainly, in my opinion, right, we've talked a lot about this. If you follow the steps, right, turning point slopes all the way into standard form. So point slope, that long-winded version, all the way back into that x and y together version. So in order to turn our equation into slope-intercept form first, right, we distribute. After we distribute, we get our y alone. And these should already be in your notes. So you don't need to write these steps down because you already should have them in there from when we first started this. This would be the chunk that you really need to pay attention to, right? And we've talked about that. Is your x value positive or is your x value negative? And then if you follow those steps, right, this is the hardest part for kids to remember. But if you follow the steps, it tells you exactly what to do when you're turning your slope intercepts back into standard. And then at the end, you just double check, right? There's 2 big pieces for standard form. Your x and your y need to be together, so you can have the x minus y in the front, which is pretty typical, or you could have the x and the y together on the right-hand side and have your equals to c number first. But your a value, that number in front, has to be positive, right? So that a value, the number in front of the x, has to be positive. Okay, so we're going to start. I think maybe we only need to do a couple questions. And once we do these couple, then I think you likely are going to be just fine with the rest of today's assignment. So I'm going to start by finding the slope, right, which our formula is up here. So just write down the 2 ordered pairs, the 9, 2, and the 6, 3. I like to, right, you've heard me say it a million times, I like to label my points before I start. So I'm going to call those guys the firsts, and I'm going to call these guys the seconds, right? And then I can put them into my slope formula, which is over here. Y minus y goes on the top, so 3 minus 2 goes on the top. And on the bottom, my x2 minus x1 would be the 6 minus the 9 goes on the bottom. 3 minus 2 on top is 1. 6 minus 9 on the bottom is negative 3. We can leave our slope like this, right? Otherwise, the better way of writing that slope is, instead of leaving that negative sign on the bottom, putting your negative sign out front is just the better way of talking about slope. Now that we know our slope, you can choose to use either of the 2 points. You can choose to use the 9, 2, or you can choose to use the 6, 3, and it doesn't matter which point. You should get the same answer in the end. So my point slope formula, I'm going to put up top. Y minus my y1 equals slope times x minus my x1. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and plug in. I'm going to use this set, 6, 3. Right, so when I plug it into my point slope, it's going to look like this. Y minus my y is 3. I'm going to put in my slope, my negative 1/3. And then inside my parentheses is x minus, and that x value is 6. So then I have my point slope equation. That's the second answer that we need. Right, so I got my point slope equation. I did the slope in the beginning. That was the first answer we need. Now I'm going to turn my point slope into slope intercept. I'm going to turn, and sometimes it's helpful to even like have these arrows, right? Slope intercept. I'm going to rewrite my equation just so I can like show the distributing part. right? So we always distribute first. Negative 1/3 times x is negative 1/3 x. A negative times a negative makes this a positive. 1/3 times 6, even though it's a fraction, right, we don't panic and write it. It would look like this. And then I'd have 6 over 3, and 6 over 3 is 2. Then I get my y alone by adding that 3 over, adding that 3 over, and I would get y equals negative 1/3 x plus that 5. Done. Slope-intercept. And then the last thing that we need to do is turn this slope-intercept equation back into standard form, right? So I'm going to go slope-intercept back into standard, and if I want to turn it into standard form, I look at that x value, and I come back here. Is my x value positive, or is my x value negative, right? And my x value is negative. I'm going to rewrite it so I see it better. Negative 1/3 x plus 5. I'm going to see that my x is negative. Because my x is negative, all I have to do is add that x over, and then we're going to have it in the right form. So I'm going to add my x over, 1/3 x, and add my 1/3 x, right? We can write this as y plus 1/3 x, or typically we see standard form with the x first. So the 1/3 x plus y first. My x's are gone on this side, and I have that positive 5 left. Then it's in that standard form. Right, so what I would like you guys to do is I would like you to, okay, so I want you to do this one. So I want you to write down the given information, and then I want you to do the exact same thing as here. I want you to first calculate the slope, then write the point slope. Remember, you could use either point and it doesn't matter, same answers. We'll get you to the final results the same. And then turn it into slope-intercept, and then turn it back into standard form. So I want you to write the two ordered pairs down, right? So my x1 is 6, my y1 is negative 2, and then my x2 is 3, and my y2 is negative 4. So I want you to pause the video and see if you can get all of the answers, the slope, the point slope, the slope-intercept, and the standard form. And then take a couple minutes to figure out all the parts, and then replay the video and watch me walk through the parts. So hopefully you pause the video, right? And then we can work through calculating the slope. y2 is negative 4, minus y1 is negative 2, 3 minus 6. This would turn into a plus. Negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2. 3 minus 6 is negative 3. And then the two negatives, right, make my final answer for slope a positive 2/3. And then I can pick whichever point I want, right? I'm going to use just the second point because it's closer. And I'm going to remember the point slope formula, right? If you need to write down the point slope formula as often as I do, then write down the point slope formula as often as I do, right? And then I can start plugging in my points. Y minus, if my y is negative 4, it's going to turn that into a plus 4, equals my slope is 2/3, x minus my x is 3. Now that I have my point slope equation, right, I can turn point slope into slope intercept form. Always distribute first. So I drop down my left side. I distribute on the right side, 2/3 times x, 2/3 x. 2/3 times a negative 3, positive times a negative is going to be a negative. 2/3 times 3 would give me 6 over 3, which is 2. I'm going to minus my 4 to both sides to get my y alone. And I would have my slope-intercept equation be 2/3 x. Negative 2 minus 4 is a negative 6, right? So now I have my slope-intercept equation, and now I can turn this slope-intercept equation back into standard form, right? If we need to go back to that step, which I'm going to, and I'm going to check to see if my x is positive or if my x is negative. My x is positive, so it's the one that requires a little more work. If my x is positive, we first subtract the y, so that, remember, the x and y can be together. I'm going to rewrite the equation so I can do the math to it. First, I'm going to subtract the y. When I subtract the y, I have nothing or 0 on the left, And I have everything over here on the right, the 2/3 x, the minus 6, and the minus y. And then it says get that plain number c to the other side. So we have to get rid of that plain number, that negative 6. So I'm going to add that 6 over, which is going to leave me with 6, and then my 2/3 x, because the 6's are gone, and that minus y. You can leave your answer exactly like this, and it's fine. Some kids like to rewrite it with the x and y first, and then the equals 6 at the end. If that makes you happier, then you write it that way. Right, but ultimately we need to be able to transition between all of the different forms of equations. So hopefully, right, these two examples were enough of review so that you can work through each set of problems on today's assignment.